Hi, friends. I'm Becky Keefe, inCourage Community Manager, and I'm delighted to be here with dear friends and fellow inCourage writers for another inCourage community conversation around the topic of racism. inCourage is a place where we seek to build community, celebrate diversity, and become women of courage. And today we invite you to join us for a conversation that we hope will do just that. Today, we're going to hear stories from women of color at inCourage about painful experiences with racism. We know racism is a big issue with tons of layers that can't all be unpacked in one video, right? But we also know that it's not some huge, far away, in the news, in history books kind of thing. Racism affects all of us. And we can begin to understand it more fully by listening to each other's stories. So that's what we're going to do today, and we invite you to join us. Before we dive in, I want to make sure that you know these amazing women. So friends, will you introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Michelle Ami Reyes. I am a second-generation Indian American gal down in Austin, Texas, and my husband is second-generation Mexican American, and we have two kids, who is 5 and Ava, who is 2.
I'm Tasha, and I am in Indiana, and my husband and I have 3 children who are 11, 8, and 5.
Aloha from Central California. My name is Dorina Lazo Gilmore Young, and I'm married to Sean. We have 3 daughters, and they are ages 8, 11, and 14, and we come from a very mixed race family. So my family is Filipino, Chinese, Polynesian, and Hawaiian, Italian, and Armenian. And my husband is Chinese American. And I have to share my favorite food because I'm a foodie. So my favorite food is lumpia, which, if you haven't heard of lumpia before, is an egg roll for Filipino culture. So basically Filipino egg rolls.
Hi, I'm Renee Swope, and I am connecting in from Charlotte, North Carolina. My family includes my husband and I, and then our sons who are 25 and 22, and then we have a daughter who we adopted when she was a baby, and she is now 11 and a half. She is from Ethiopia, and my ethnic background is primarily French and German.
Friends, I'm so glad you're here. And like I said at the get-go, I am Becky Keefe. I'm the community manager here at inCourage, and I'm joining today from Southern California, where I live here with my husband and my 3 boys, who are 8, 10, and 11. And I love currently eating gluten-free pizza. I found a good recipe. So I'm really grateful for each of you friends being here today. And now I am going to hand the mic over to Michelle Reyes, who is going to help us set the stage for why this conversation about sharing painful experiences of racism is important. So Michelle.
Yeah, thank you, Becky. Yeah, we're just going to be talking about some of the stories of and experiences of racism that we've experienced, and this is such a complex issue. Like when as soon as you start delving into the topic of racism, there's so many layers. Like, where do you start? How do you define things? Individuals, systems. I mean, it's a very complex issue, right? But we want to start by just taking time to make space for these stories and the importance of people of color, and in this space, women of color, sharing their stories and others listening to their stories, right? Like learning to just be a good listener and caring and valuing another person's narrative. And so this is what we want to focus on today. We need to hear people's stories, and we need to hear everyone's story because we're all coming from a different place. And the more we learn, the bigger and richer picture that we'll have. Adrian Pay, he's written a wonderful book called The Minority Experience, and in it he talks about how the minority experience is defined by 3 things: by powerlessness, by pain, and by the past. And so when it comes to stories of racism, pain, it's there, for better, for worse, it's embedded into these experiences. And so many of us here have been told things like, when I see you, I don't see color, or when I see you, I don't think people, I don't see you as Indian, I just see you as American, or I see you, I don't see your ethnicity. But when I hear those things, what I hear them say is, I don't see your pain. Or when women of color share their stories of pain and are denied or delegitimized in some way, or called snowflakes, or maybe you just didn't understand what that person was telling you. What we hear is, I don't hear your pain, or I don't want to make space for your pain. And so that's why it's important for us as Christians and majority Christians as well, to not only give space to the stories of pain, but to then also believe them. If this is how we've experienced it, then those feelings are real. And what we want to hear is someone say, I'm sorry that you went through that, instead of trying to pick a fight or get defensive or ask all the questions to proof check stories. So there's so many more conversations to have, like how to define racism, and hopefully we'll get there. But today we want to start with just talking about people's stories and the need to see them as important. And so we need to see the pain. We need to make space for that, and not try to just quickly pass over this or get defensive. So I want to encourage everyone who's with us right now just to take a deep breath and prepare your heart to listen to these stories. And so with that, I want to just first turn it to Tasha and give you the floor, Tasha, to share more.
Yeah, and I just realized I forgot to say what my ethnicity is, like everyone else. So I am biracial. I am half Korean. My mom is Korean, grew up in Korea, and my dad grew up in California, but he is Dutch and English, and a bit of a Germanic mix. So yeah, so there's that. And my favorite food, kimchi and French fries. So kind of goes along with it. Yeah, and then I think kind of like Michelle said, with taking a deep breath, I think just as we go into this conversation, it's important to remember that it can be uncomfortable. Whether you're hearing something that you resonate with or hearing something that you completely don't understand, it can feel really uncomfortable. And I think we've been told in the past, whether directly or just subtly, that when you feel that, you should run, or like Michelle said, get defensive. So we just want to encourage you guys to instead to lean into that, and maybe even view that discomfort and that awkwardness as something that can be a guide for all of us here, and also for you, because we're inviting you into this conversation. So, yeah.
Well, Tasha, would you be willing to share a story from your own life of a time in which you experienced racism?
We actually were talking about this a little before, and I think sometimes it's hard if you've experienced a lot of microaggressions. Those aren't really newsworthy, but they are very damaging in a long-term way. So yeah, so there are a lot of different things I could share, and honestly, the response that comes to mind, or this response I have, is to want to be like, well, that's not really a big deal. Like I want to lessen it, the way it's impacted me. But the one I wanted to share today is one I've actually written about for inCourage. And it was in elementary school. And I was with a bunch of girls and we were playing, and one of the girls was talking about how that weekend she was going to be doing some modeling. And so, all of us girls were like, oh, I don't remember how old I was, but I was old enough to think that that was a really big deal. And she was like, I want to be a model, when I grow up. And me, this wasn't like a big dream of mine, but I think just kind of following her said, oh, well, I do too. I want to do that too. And she turned to me and just looked me straight in the eye and said, you can't, you're Asian. Asians are short and they're cute, but they can't be models. And it just really took me aback, of course. But I didn't realize how long it would stay with me. So even as I got older and started to realize, okay, that was her definition of beauty, it really marked the way I saw myself. Like, I can be cute, whatever that means, like a kid, and I can't be anything else. So yeah, and that was just the first of many times where I've had other women, men, other people try to define beauty for me and exclude or specifically bring up my Asianness as something that either doesn't apply, that can't be considered beautiful, or just on the flip side, something that's really strange and kind of like a fetish, you know. So yeah, there's a lot to that, but it was really painful. I remember being really embarrassed too. I was the only Asian girl in that group of friends. So
thank you for sharing that, Tasha. And I'm so sorry that you've experienced that, that was a lie burdened upon you. And you know what's heartbreaking about it is that I get it, because I've had the same thing, right? And so many women of color, this you know, we don't fit these white beauty standards, right? And so we've been told you're not pretty, or you're not pretty like a white woman is. Or we've had boys tell us, you know, like I've had boys tell me, right, that like, you know, no one's going to date you kind of thing. Or because of our body types are different, or the hair on our arms is different. And it just, you know, it's like you said, it's all those microaggressions, that they're little comments, one day here, one day there, but over a lifetime build up, and you begin to really internalize this, like, maybe I must not be beautiful, which is evil. And I'm so sorry that you've experienced that. I don't know if you want to give space to share more about just how you've processed that experience now. Like I know for me, in the last few years, going on my own cultural identity development, like the more I'm learning about who I am and who God made me to be, I'm like looking back on these experiences with friends, and learning to find healing in that, or just process it differently. Like as an adult, how are you looking back on this experience and processing that?
you know, I think it's a lot more choppy, if that makes sense, like the line between then and here. It's not a straight line, but I remember really distinct moments. You know, I remember reading books by Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison, and where they talked about, and just some of that self-hate, like looking in the mirror and wanting to take, I mean, for them, the darkness away. And I can remember, you know, numerous times, and obviously I didn't draw it back to those comments, but times where I would just look in the mirror. And I think a lot of women deal with self-hate, but it was literally like the ethnic parts of me I wanted to like get rid of, like pull off. I didn't want anyone to see that. And so there were moments where, I mean, from putting sun in my hair, not that dyeing your hair is bad, and I've dyed my hair all different shades from healthy desire. But as a kid, like spraying it, like kind of going crazy, like trying to get rid of my Korean hair, just different things like that. So, I mean, I think there was a change though when I started to, like when I read those books and I was like, okay, this is this is a thing. Like what I've been doing in the mirror my whole life that I probably at that point had never talked about, that hatred for myself and how my ethnicity shows up. This is a real thing that people deal with. So like being introduced to that, I think helped me, because I thought, okay, without knowing the words, there's a system here. And it's not just me, and it's taking a toll on a lot of people, you know. And then I think it gave me kind of this fire, like I want to fight back, like I don't want to buy into that. And I guess too, hearing, I guess, the strength of other women who have proudly lived into their heritage, like that has really, so throughout those years, I think seeing that, and then slowly owning it in different ways, like little decisions, really, like I'm just going to let my hair go wild. Like I'm not going to try to tame how God's made me. So I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, just I think in little ways, and then also feeling the affirmation from the Lord, that yes, this is the way you should be walking. Like reclaiming what I gave you, how I colored you, how I, you know, made your story, and really embracing it, and even calling it out in others. So
that's powerful. And I know I'm sure too, with becoming a mom, that this has been a topic that you've probably had to readdress, maybe even in good and bad ways. I know for myself, I felt like a lot of these experiences of beauty standards, I just stuffed down and like tried to ignore until I had, my first son, and then he was bullied for his skin color, and I was like, oh my goodness, I need to process this. I need to process my own pain and lean into my who God has made me to be, because now my son needs me and I need to like be a voice of truth to my son. So I'm sure that these are also conversations that you now have with your children about, and I think it's part of what we have to do is we have to speak to our kids daily. You are beautiful just the way you are, and your brown skin is beautiful, and God made you this way. And I feel like every time I do that with my kids, I'm also like saying that, I'm speaking the truth to myself too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
No, I talk to myself. I have to to kind of combat, because they still come, those things are so ingrained. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Tasha. Darina, I want to get to your story as well, but I also just want to give you space to respond to what Tasha is sharing, because I know you get it.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up the idea too of microaggressions. And I don't know if everyone in our audience really is familiar with that term. I think it's been used more recently in mainstream, but just that idea of little comments or little things that pick at us, that maybe don't feel like this big racist event, but that really become a part of our psyche and prick our hearts. And so, similarly, Tasha, I feel like I've had a lot of those things throughout my life, that the sum of them is weighty, but to share them sometimes feels almost like you have to sort of explain it away, because it's like, oh, that's probably not that big of a deal. And so I'm grateful for you just being willing to share that story. And I think it's a real thing that especially women of color, but probably all women, have to reckon with our notions of beauty and what we've been raised with and what people have told us, even what the media shows us. And as women of Christ, like as daughters of Christ, and even for some of us who are raising daughters, it's so important that we kind of figure out what our theology is about that, and how Jesus sees us is so important. And I have 3 daughters, as I mentioned, so this is always at the forefront of my mind, that what I say, even the way that I look at myself in the mirror, is powerfully affecting every one of my daughters, even when I don't even realize that they're watching or listening. So I appreciate what you shared. Thank you.
Tasha, I just want to say thank you for sharing that, and to all of my sisters of color, and to you, that that's not a small thing. And I'm sorry for the ways that those things have been minimized or dismissed, or just our culture makes you want to minimize or dismiss it. But like you're saying, Darina, that really makes a lot of sense, that like in and of itself, it kind of is a small thing, but the compounding effect is real, and it's deep, and it's significant. And I recognize that, and I'm sorry for how you have been pained and wounded by those lies.
I would like to share something too. I think that it could be defined in your mind, and maybe in some people's minds, like that was just a small thing, little girls saying mean things, but I don't sense that. Like, God in his word, he talks about beauty, and Song of Solomon, like, it's a man describing the beauty of a woman. Like, beauty, God knows that our beauty and is ingrained in us. Like, we want to be beautiful. There's something ingrained in us. Like, beauty matters to him, and for a woman, we do attach it to our value, because in a lot of ways it is what people are attracted to, and then what they compliment us on. And so, and when something is spoken like that, when you're that young, it becomes a filter, and it does form who you see in the mirror, unfortunately, because we're seeing ourselves in the mirror every day, right? Who you see in the mirror. And then from those thoughts come the words that you're saying to yourself. And so, like, I just know, like, that's a big deal. And so even though it's not something that would maybe as a culture, like a community, we'd name racism, like that's huge. Like that's really wounding. And so I just want to just say I feel the weight of it, and I'm really sad and sorry, but I'm so grateful for your willingness to be vulnerable, courageous with us, for us to know as white women that this was a part of your story, you know, and this is a common wounding, place of wounding. So just thank you for that courage.
Thank you for sharing that, Renee, because I think this becomes a parenting conversation, right, about what our children are saying. And if parents see their kids making comments about other people's skin color or beauty standards and just say, oh, well, you know, it's just kids being kids or little girls being little girls, you know, then it just gets swept under the rug like no big deal, right? And then these little comments made by young girls, then they grow up and become older girls, and it just, you know, snowballs. So it's good to say no, even though it was like a comment made by a young girl, we can call that out as sin and say, I'm not going to allow my kid to treat another image bearer in this way, you know.
The little girl's perception. Yeah. Well, the little girl's perception was shaped somewhere.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So I just, like, I want to call that out too.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, good. Thank you, Renee.
Like ways that we can even be intentionally, like, not just after something like that happens, but affirming different colors and beauty with our children. I mean, just in simple ways, like sometimes when something comes up, I'll be like, isn't her skin so beautiful? To just kind of tell that story already, like what's true. You know, it's not my kid's skin color, but it's beautiful, and I want them to see it, you know, as that. So
yeah, I love that. Thank you, Tasha. And Darina, I want to also give space to you, and would love to hear from you a story or an experience that you've had as well.
You know, I was trying to think about some of these different stories, and kind of like Tasha, I had a lot of different sort of microaggression stories, but I was thinking about a specific thing that happened to me when I was a little girl, and I was actually kind of processing this a bit recently with my mom, that I was in 3rd grade when this happened, and my youngest daughter is actually going into 3rd grade, so it has a bit of gravity for me as a mom as well. But just to share a little bit of the scene and the story, I grew up on the south side of Chicago in a neighborhood that was pretty culturally divided, and the kind of series of blocks that were together, most of the people were Irish Catholic in their cultural heritage, although there was some mix, and our family, I was definitely the only child of color on the block. So I remember this day that we were coming home from the grocery store. My mom and I had gone grocery shopping. It was in the summertime, and we had gotten out of the car, and she had like gone in quickly with the groceries. I was kind of lagging behind a little bit and trying to help her. And I heard this noise coming that just, it almost sounded like this swarm of bees. It was like these buzzing noises, but it wasn't actually bees. It was this group of girls that were from my block, and they just basically kind of circled around me, surrounded me, and they had out their fingers like pinching kind of, and they were just trying to pinch me. One of them knocked off my glasses, and it was just that moment where I realized, like, wow, this isn't just a one-on-one thing. Like, I didn't really have this, I couldn't defend myself in that moment. And it's one of the few times that I could remember actually being physically attacked. But I know that there had been other comments that had been made, and I don't remember the specific moments, but just that they couldn't play with me because I was brown, or my best friend was Black. And so they definitely, you know, could not include us in some of the neighborhood games or swimming, some of the other things. And so at the time, I didn't recognize that as being racist. But in reflection as an adult, I recognize just how weighty that experience was. And my mom came out of the house, and so she saw them, and she basically, I don't remember her words, but just told them to stop. and they scattered and kind of all ran back to their homes. And I, picked up my glasses. My mom helped me. We went inside, and then my mom is from white background. Like I mentioned, she's mostly Italian, but also Jewish and Armenian in her heritage. And she has a strong sense of justice. And she said, we need to go and we need to visit all of these homes. And I need to talk to all the parents of these girls who did this. And I was mortified as I sat there, because I thought, okay, now I actually have to face these kids who are the offenders in the situation. I didn't know what that was going to mean for me in the future. And I also had the embarrassment of like standing there while my mom was going to have all these conversations. So probably the bigger part of the story was even for me to physically go through that and emotionally go through that, visiting each house and my mom talking to them. And some of the parents were very remorseful, or immediately called out their kids. And, one girl who was made to apologize, and there was another parent that was very dismissive. And so I realized that in that there was a lot of guilt and shame that was kind of swirled and wrapped up into that story that I internalized, and I didn't have the words as a third grader to really articulate what had happened. But now as an adult, I realize like how damaging that is. And even it's like emotional for me to share it with you ladies. It's not a story I've shared a lot of times in my life. But just realizing just how hurtful that was.
I am so sorry, Dorina. I can't even imagine what that was like. And I can understand on some level, because as you're sharing that, memories are coming to me, right, of being accosted by groups of white girls in bathrooms and other sort of incidences. I mean, this is the stuff of racial trauma, honestly, and that those memories and that pain, you'll never forget it, it lingers. And so one, I want to thank you for your vulnerability to share, because oftentimes we keep these stories, right, and don't share them. And so I want to just thank you for that, for your vulnerability. And kind of a similar question to Tasha's, that, you mentioned this happened in third grade. Like, as you now, as an adult woman, reflect on this, how do you make sense of this? I know we've talked a little bit, and I'm just like trying to understand, like, what in the world? Why would these girls like buzz like bees? I mean, it definitely seems like it's this internalized, like, physical attack. Like, how are you processing this now as an adult?
That's such a good question. And even as we've been preparing to have this conversation, I've been thinking through that. I think for a lot of years, honestly, I tried to sort of explain it away and think, oh, well, maybe they're just trying to be funny and didn't realize how hurtful it was. Or, like, you just kind of in your mind say some of these things because it seems so unreal that kids would be that harsh and hard and single someone out. But I know bullying happens a lot in our culture even today. This isn't just a thing of 30 years ago. But I think one of the things that I'm so grateful for is that even though I was embarrassed by my mom's sense of justice in that situation, she also modeled for me how important it is to speak up when something is not right. And that's something that I've carried with me throughout my whole life. And I really, especially in high school and college, I felt that calling, so to speak, that God was calling me to use my mixed race heritage as an opportunity to be a bridge builder. And that's not to say that just because you're multiracial that you're being called to that, because just by virtue of being from mixed race doesn't qualify you. Or in sometimes, like, we put that on people of color, like, oh, you need to educate me. And that wasn't the sense, but it was actually a sense of God saying, I've designed you a specific way. And even the way that my mom spoke to me, she always talked about how beautiful my skin was and what a gift it was that I had experienced in my family from so many different cultures. And even, you know, the way we ate, the way we had our celebrations in our house was always really celebrating so many different cultures. So I felt that was normal. And I look back on that now and I realize that even though I went through that really hard situation as a very young child, that those formative years after that, that my parents really helped me fortify my cultural identity. And even to the point where I felt like, hey, God's calling me. He's calling me to be a bridge, whether that's through my writing or through, you know, even conversations that I had with people on the college campus, even sometimes my presence, to just sort of redefine that this is what it, you know, what a brown girl is like, or what a girl from a mixed race heritage is like. And so it was something that turned around for me. It wasn't shame and guilt as much as just a pride and a calling that God gave me.
That's beautiful. I think there's such beauty and power in how God has like spoken to you from that experience. But I think it's also really important for people to know that you see the world differently because of those experiences, you know. And this is not a dig on white people. So I'm saying this in all love, but I think majority of people, they don't understand that for a lot of people of color, we walk the streets with that thought in the back of our mind of who might accost us today, who's going to attack us today. And I even had a similar situation, not similar, but a situation this morning in our own community where I was with my kids, and a white woman walked up to us and was asking all these questions about, like, do you live here? What's your, you know, what street do you live on? What's your address? You know, like clearly trying to say, I don't think you belong here because of your brown skin. And I had to deal with that. And that's not the first time someone has asked me, like, prove that you belong to this neighborhood or to this, you know, fill in the blank. And so that kind of experience that you had, Darina, it shapes you, it forms you to you have to then, like you said, you have to learn how to protect yourself. You have to learn how to defend yourself. And I don't know if you want to speak into that, but I think it's so important that these experiences of pain, they shape how we see the world and how we live our life day to day.
Well, I want to speak for a moment to any women of color that might be listening to us too, and just to recognize that, you know, whatever stories of racial trauma that we have, that we're invited to steward those. And so, to be honest, like, I don't share this story all the time. It's not like my badge of honor. I've written a short story about it, but it's not been something public. And it's not that I want to hide it. But I've been thinking about this, that there are certain times and places to be able to share our stories. And then there are other times where it's okay to keep them to ourselves. And partly because when we share our stories, there's a trauma that does happen. And I'm learning about that as a 43-year-old woman. I would have never been able to articulate that maybe even 5 years ago. But especially with some of the things that are happening right now in the news and in our country with so much racial unrest, I've had to be very serious about my own soul care and tending, that I don't always have to be the one speaking up in these spaces when there's a conversation about racism, and that I can choose. And so for today, I chose to share the story with inCourage because it's a place that I care about. And I want women who are listening, whether you're women of color or white women, to hear that story and to know that it's real, that it's happened in the past and the present. But for women of color also, that we can be empowered by stewarding our stories well. And so I don't want women to feel like they need to be forced to share their stories, because this is a cultural moment we're in. And at the same time, there's a really sweet invitation sometimes, like this space, where I know that the five of you, or the four of you and myself, like, we've created this safe space. And so I've gained courage even in thinking about this conversation, because I know I'm sitting here on Zoom or standing here, whatever you want to say. I have sisters who care, who listen, and who have my back. It's not always like that. So I'm learning, how do I articulate that even for my daughters? How do I help them to discern when it's a safe space and when it's not, and not to be pushed sometimes into those spaces unless they feel called to them?
Amen.
Really
So
good.
I just give space for the three of you if you want to respond to Darina's story as well.
Darina, I just want to say thank you for choosing to share your heart here in this space. I know that it's costly for you to do that, and I'm really sorry for the trauma that you have experienced. And yet I also find myself like with tears of hope, because the way that you speak and the confidence that the Lord has given you, it reminds me of that promise in Romans that says like God works all things for the good of those who love him. And yet like what has happened to you is not good. Like the racism and that happened to you this morning, Michelle, is not good. And yet we have a faithful God who, and like, as you were saying that, Darina, like I have opportunity to steward my story and to steward my pain. And it's not in a forced shoebox. I love how you said it's like not, don't do it for the cultural moment, but like you are doing that because he is leading you in that. And I recognize it as a gift to me as your friend and your sister, and a gift to us as a community here at inCourage. So thank you.
Thanks, Becky. I appreciate that.
I have a question, and you don't have to answer this, or I have a thought that went through my mind, but I know like this, just in talking with you outside of this conversation, like this is new, and you just recently, shared it with your daughter, and like you said, you're processing it with your mother. But I know that that equally hard to what the girls did was also how you then had to stand, before the parents. And I wonder, because I think as a mom, and I think other moms maybe of color may wonder like what would have been, in addition to maybe, because I wouldn't ask your mom not to be who she was, but also maybe in addition to that could have helped feel empowering to you in the moment, or just not maybe lessen the shame and guilt that you felt. Because I just know there's a lot of moms, especially women of color moms, who are navigating this. But I just wonder, I'm just curious. And like I said, you may not even have thought or ready to say that, but it's just a thought I had.
That's such a good question. I'm not sure now as an adult reflecting that I would have asked my mom to do anything different. I think it may have also had more to do with my personality as a young person, that I was quieter and shy, and I didn't want that kind of attention. And also I've come to a place where I really value my mom's sense of justice in that. And I realized that it was so powerful for her as a white woman also to stand up for me. I mean, obviously I was her daughter, so there's the mama bear part of that. But then there's, we talk about people being allies. And so in a sense, she was positioning herself to be an ally for me, that not only was I her daughter, but that she would, and this is who my mom was and is today. She wasn't going to stand for that, whether that was her daughter or her friend's daughter or one of her students, because she was a teacher, like that was consistent for her. And so even though in the moment I wasn't, enjoying it or feeling proud of it, now looking back, I realized how it was really powerful. And, just to empower mamas that, it doesn't need to be like some forceful thing or some eloquent speech, that sometimes just even being able to create space where we stand up for our kids is really important. I was thinking about this more recently with the coronavirus stuff that's been happening, because my youngest daughter experienced something at school where kids were like, talking at recess and saying, well, if you're Chinese, then you must have it. And my husband being Chinese American, my youngest was so distraught about that. And she came home in tears and she was like, Mom, I don't get what they're talking about. And so, not to go into too much detail about that story, but, you know, I just had to talk her through that as a mom. But I also had to go to the school and to talk to the teacher and the principal. And I could have just said, oh, well, that's our friend's son. And, you know, sometimes he mouths off and he doesn't know what he's talking about. But I realized for me in that moment, even taking on sort of the torch that my mom had passed me, that it was important that I talk to the teacher and to the principal, and even to conversate with my kids at the dinner table. Like, this is what your teacher said. This is how your principal responded, because that's where to me, there's a system that needs to be addressed. It's relational, but also this system. And, you know, sometimes that can be scary to do, but I was empowered by thinking about what my mom would have probably done in that situation. And so I didn't have any hesitation in me because that had been modeled for me.
I love that. Well, I know there's so much more that we could talk about, but I want to just bring it back to Tasha and Darina as we're wrapping up here, just to even give some insight to the people listening. Like, what has it been like for you both to share your stories virtually and publicly? And what would you like for the women listening in, and women and men listening in, to know about what this process of sharing your story right now has been like?
I think for me, I've shared this before, and so it doesn't feel so traumatic. It's not the first time to share this. But kind of like Darina was saying, the first time I did share it was not that long ago. And so I think even just going back to some of the stories, like before you're even sharing it, can be traumatic. And it's okay if it's slow, but it needs to be processed in safe places. And I think one part of that is having other people, if you're a woman of color, having other people in your life that have gone through those things, that are willing to share those things, or to hold space for your stories. Because I mean, Darina was talking about her mom standing up for her. I don't think it was until much later, until I had seen other people, first in books, because I had no one until then, and then later in real life, who could say, yes, that happened to me too. Stop, you know, you can stop saying it wasn't a big deal, all those things, and stop acting like things aren't a big deal today. So I guess just realizing that it does matter, and that you can, that it is good to process it, but that you can do it slowly, kind of like Darina was already saying. Yeah, and you don't have to, it doesn't have to be yelled out to the whole world, or even there's nothing, you don't have to share it with your neighbor. You know, like you can pick the people that you give that away to.
That's so good. Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on that, even now, like in certain spaces, when I'm about to share a story of racism in my life, like my heart is pounding, like sometimes my hands are shaking, like there are real physical, visceral responses to bringing up these memories. And I think it's really important that people know what's happening physically and emotionally for people when they share. It's a very vulnerable state to be in. So thank you for mentioning that, Tasha. Yeah, and Darina, what would you add to that?
Oh, I think Tasha said it so well. I love how you just mentioned giving yourself space to go slowly. And I would just add to that, to go at your own pace, you know, that we can use stories in a powerful way, but also that they do affect us, and they can even re-traumatize us at times. So honestly, for me to share this was hard. It was hard. I'm not going to lie. And I even, I've had some tears about it, and realized that it was still fresh for me, even a lot of years later. But I also, for me, there's also something very empowering about being able to share a story. And I think that's perhaps the writer in me I just finished reading Latasha Morrison's book, Be the Bridge. And one of the steps that she talks about in racial reconciliation that I think is so important is that acknowledgement. And so for other people to acknowledge your pain and even to sit with you in the grief of that sometimes, to me, is very healing. It's not the end of the process, but it's part of the process. And I think it's a part of the process that we often try to skip over because we want to go straight to the place of injustice and how we can fix it. And so I've been learning a lot about just inviting people to share their stories and even being brave to share mine and how there's healing in that itself.
That's so good. That's beautiful. Thank you both for sharing. I'm just so grateful for you both and for just the inCourage community. And thank you, Becky and Renee, for also just modeling what it means to be good listeners too, and showing your love and care for this, in this space, and sharing vulnerable stories.
Thank you, Michelle, for gently and beautifully leading us through this conversation. I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for the four of you. I'm grateful for the ways you guys are willing to model and to go first in sharing your story, giving Renee and I the opportunity to listen. And Doreen, I think what you said is so true, that so often, especially today, we want to jump to the now what, how do we fix it, what do we do? Mm-hmm. And part of what I'm learning that we do is we do this. Mm-hmm. We sit with people in our real lives. I mean, we're all over the country here, but we are in real relationships with each other. And we make space and time to listen. And so I'm really grateful for the ways that you each have done that today. And to you, our inCourage community who has joined us, thank you for spending this time with us. We don't take that for granted. We are actually going to have a part 2 to this conversation. A kind of so what now? Like, how do I have my own community conversations with people in my real life? We're going to unpack a little bit more of why these conversations are important and some things that we have learned and found helpful along the way. So we hope that you will join us for part 2 in just a little bit.